We're fortunate to have Dr. Kearns with us today. He's from Tampa, Florida. He was a professor at the University of South Florida and took an interest in clocks in 2018. This is a man that's going to move rapidly. And his first slide he showed today, for me, was so beautifully seductive. So this is an article in the making. This is somebody that's going to continue to be part of our progress forward into education. Without much else to say, we'll stay to clocks, but his history is fascinating. So if you got a chance to talk to him personally, do that. Dr. Kearns,
Yes.
you're on the show.
Thank
I
you.
do appreciate your coming.
Thank you, Ken. It's a great pleasure to be here, and thank you for coming this morning. As Ken said, I was a university professor at USF for a period of about 29 years, and published well over 100 articles in a variety of peer-reviewed journals and the rest. But moving into horology was a challenge all in its own self. And this morning I wanted to talk to you about what has become sort of a passion of mine, and really more of a, not so much anything other than a resurrection, if you will. It's really more than a restoration of an ancient clock that I came by through the Antique American Clocks and Todd Porter when I originally purchased it. So let's talk a little bit about the clockmaker. Andries Vermeulen lived from 1680 to 1752. He was from Germany and had come to Amsterdam prior to 1708. It's kind of a critical date, and I want you to just remember that as we get further into the discussion. In 1716, he was part of the Registry of Good Men, which was put together by the other clockmakers in Amsterdam for the benefit of the local administrators, such that they can essentially see that they're highly ethical business people and are eligible for running for positions like the mayor and the like in town. Vermeulen made diverse pieces, some of which were very elaborate astronomical clocks, and of course the current musical clock, which has fewer complications than some of the ones that I'll show you. Vermeulen's works are in the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam, and are quite beautiful to look at, as you will see. They're considered national treasures. One such work shows a really fine dual technique, which is this one, as you can see, which is in the Rijksmuseum. This is the face of that particular clock, and it should give you some idea of the different complications that are in effect on it. Notice that there's very little remaining of the bells in the back of this for the production music. This is the rear view of the same clock. The name of Bert Dagenaar will show up from time to time. Bert is a colleague of mine, a horologist, and is very much connected with the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam, and has provided a considerable amount of help to me in terms of the restoration of this clock, which spanned a couple of continents and has taken up most of my last 2 years. Dagenaar himself actually owns the companion clock to the one that I just showed you that was in the Rijksmuseum. So this is his, and you'll notice the difference in terms of the artistry on the top of the case, the figures. One of the things that's interesting about Dagenaar's clock is that he also has his own pin barrels that he has made up, as you can see here, and that Vermeulen also made a piece of furniture in order to hold the additional pin barrels, which can be swapped out. So it's a rather nice feature in the sense that these were the major home entertainment pieces of the time. Some of these, I don't know if you can read the writing on the right, but he has created some of his own pin barrels, which include a whiter shade of pale. Let's see.
Stairway to Heaven.
Yeah, painted black, and a couple of other rock and roll pieces, which he had provided to me the audio files, which I happen to have on my computer, but I'm not going to play right now. So carillons in the Netherlands were really all the rage. They used to have opportunities for the local individuals, the local citizenry, to gather around the bell tower and have performances daily during the summer months. When the weather was nice in the evening, they might have up to 2 different performances in a week. In Florida, of course, we have Bach Tower, so we've been keeping the tradition alive to some extent. One of the things that you'll see here as well, so we just lost our projector, this is what I was worried about. These particular large carillons were also automated, so this one in particular is in Ghent, and the individual pins inside of the barrel measuring probably about 10 to 12 feet in diameter, can be slipped in and out to change the music. So you have different musical numbers which can be played on the hour by the clockwork mechanism, and that runs up through a series of cables back to the bells. One of the advantages, of course, for the agricultural workers in the area is that once the music begins to sound in the tower, it carries on the wind, and so if you're out in the fields working, it would draw your attention to say, oh, well, okay, I hear that song. When it finishes, it's going to strike the hour, so I'll know if it's noon or if it's 1 o'clock or 2 o'clock, or is it time to quit work for the day, and these sorts of things. So they had a very good functional reason for having those devices, in addition to having the entertainment value. So once they were converted into clocks, the move was really to create these as home entertainment devices for the wealthy, if you will. The opportunity to have music in your home anytime that you wanted to. And some of these songs might be the kind that you could put on for the benefit of the pastor when he came to have dinner on Sunday. Other ones might be bawdy music that you would have friends over, and while you're having cigars or smoking a pipe with them and cognac, you'd all sing these bawdy and raucous songs. So the pin barrels could be made up specifically for a person's taste. So for my case, in my clock, there are a couple that are marked favorite, and those are typically the ones where the owner has specified which particular pieces of music he wants to have encoded on the barrel. So one of the things I want to take just a small sidelight on is a little discussion about this gentleman, who's Daniel Quare. Daniel Quare was operating in England about that time that Vermeulen was involved. And of course, the English have a very different way of managing clock production than the Dutch did. Of course, everything was controlled by guilds, and that was right about, I think, early 1600s. The Worshipful Company of Clockmakers was created. And by 1708, Daniel Quare had become the 7th master of the Worshipful Company of Clockmakers. And what's important about this is Quare himself was a Quaker, and he was persecuted by the church and actually by the administration. He had as much as about almost 50% of his holdings confiscated as a fine for attending religious services. So he was having problems there earlier in his life, but by 1703, Queen Anne ascended to the throne, and she was a Protestant and looked more favorably upon him. And by 1708, he became the 7th master of the Worshipful Company of Clockmakers. But one of the things the reason that I bring this up is because of this rather ironic situation, which is that during that time I was asked by David Boyd to take on the restoration of a Daniel Quare clock at our facility, which is a 1-year clock, which strikes on the hour and has complications for the porthole moon dial, as well as a date function on this. So, getting one of these clocks to run over a period of years is a bit of a challenge, as you can imagine. They're very delicately balanced devices, but we have it up and going, and we're looking actually for a buyer for that. So that's something that we can come back to later. But we think at that time that it would have been likely that Vermeulen and Quare might have heard of each other, if not had met each other at that time. Since Vermeulen, by about 1708 and later, had become the highest paid clockmaker in Amsterdam. And so there was intense competition going on between the Dutch and the English. So let's take a look at what my clock looked like when it arrived on the scene. As you can see, it wasn't in very good shape. As a matter of fact, you can notice up from the left that virtually all of the bells and the hammers and the keyframe are not there. There's only, of course, 2 cables there for the 3 trains. And there seem to be some issues with the projector, I'm sorry about. Of course, the case was in a really rough shape. And of course, the face and the rest of it needed work. So you can see that it was really more of a basket case at that time. So let me list off here, as you can see, some of the deficiencies. So no bells, no hammers, no keyframe, no music selector mechanism. We had no idea what the music was that was encoded on this barrel. This was a complete enigma. We didn't know where the hammers were supposed to be with respect to the unknown bells. And so there were a lot of variables in this equation. One of the other issues was that this particular clock had been in a fire. The case had been scorched. It had fallen over, and the plates on the pillars were bent relative to each other, so the gears would not mesh, the wheels, I should say. And of course, the music train was inactive. So I looked at this and thought to myself, what the hell have I bought? In addition, of course, the one corner of the face was chipped from a fall, as you would be able to see. The backboard was split. Someone had put plastic over the vents on the side of the hood here, where this nice filigree is, presumably to reduce the sound of the bells at one point or another. And of course, the veneer was all peeling off and falling on the floor. So it was less than a beautiful piece at that time. So being a university professor, one of the things that they teach us is how to find information anywhere in the world. And it's a good skill to have, especially when you're starting with something that is a big mystery. It's like an Agatha Christie, you have no idea what the heck it's supposed to look like. When I purchased it from Todd, he told me that he thought that there was supposed to be a comb, like a music box, up here across the top. Didn't realize that bells were supposed to be there, and he thought it would just be a simple matter of getting a comb and it would play. And the more I looked at this maker and others about that era, I realized, of course, that was not at all the case. So I went and acquired 3 different texts from NAWCC. C. Smith book on Spielberg for ein freies Startklock, which is unfortunately out of print, but NAWCC did have a copy of it in Dutch, which I made use of Google Translate quite a bit and picked up some Dutch in the process. Or Hume's wonderful book on restoring musical clocks and music boxes. And of course, Winkle and Sullivan's text on the music of early American clocks. And I found that Smith's book in Dutch was actually probably the best for our purposes, in the sense that he takes you through the whole process of building a musical clock from scratch. In other words, how the hammer is constructed and what different strategies were in use by the Dutch. And so that sort of gave me the courage to try making some of my own. The other thing I did, and this was probably where things get really interesting, is that I formed a formal relationship with the curator of the Spielklok Museum in Utrecht. And the Spielklok Museum, if you have never been there, specializes in musical clocks. They have a large selection. And Marieke Lefebvre-Morsman was the curator at that time, and I hired her to evaluate the barrel on this particular clock. And what she had me do was take photographs, high-resolution photographs of the entire barrel, rotating it about 15 or 20 degrees, snapping another one, and so forth, until she had a full 3D reconstruction she could do. And from that, over a period of the next 4 months, she was able to decipher what music was actually on the barrel and tell me what bells I would need, in what order, and also how many hammers per bell, and in what order these needed to be placed in the key frame. So once we had all of this information, it became just really more of a matter of going through the process of fabricating it. And I made close friends with a colleague of mine by the name of Tom English. And Tom is a retired master machinist from, actually worked for Anheuser-Busch for many years, setting up assembly lines and the rest, and has an absolutely astonishing shop of his own, including a Bridgeport mill and a variety of other high-end tools. And using his Bridgeport, we went through and cut a keyframe and made the individual hammers for this device, one at a time. And there was an awful lot of work that was done as far as actually machining these and filing them by hand in order to get them to line up. Because one of the things that is true about this particular clock is the fact that all of the scribe lines that are on here that tell you which tracks are which are not evenly spaced, as you would expect if you had a high precision type device laying this out. This was all done manually, so the keyframe may or may not be exactly where it should be. So it required a lot of individual placement and work in order to get the hammers to line up with the tracks as they should be. And then of course, there's the process of fabricating the heads, which were done in brass, all involving a small hole in the end through which basically created a steel shaft and silver soldered those in the end. I know silver solder's not popular with a lot of people, but I wanted something that would have a fair amount of strength and be able to last for the rest of my life anyway, with minimum problems. Now the acquisition of the bells was quite another story. Now that I know about what the bell ranges are supposed to be and how many hammers are supposed to be where, there comes the question of where do you acquire a set of bells where you're going to get enough of them that you're going to be able to meet the requirements as I have listed there. These are the different keys and the different locations. And of course, I turned at this point to eBay and actually found a gentleman who was selling a bell set, nested bells for 30 bells, which seemed probably like there was going to be enough to give me 14 out of that would work for me. And so I took a flyer with this, a rather expensive one, and fortunately I was rewarded. We were able to find the correct bell set out of that. Pitching the bells was another matter, making absolutely sure we had what we thought we had. One of my colleagues, and this is the third individual that I've been working with, is Bill Patterson. Bill is a concert level violinist who has played in Lincoln Center and in Carnegie Hall. And he came by with his violin and we sat and pitched every one of the bells to make sure absolutely that we had what we thought we did. And so I had a pretty fair amount of confidence by the time I was done that we were going to have the correct set of bells in the right order. Now the music selector itself was also a bit of a problem because obviously it was missing. We really didn't know exactly what it was going to look like. There were some photos that were volunteered to me by Marieke Morsman from the Spielklock Museum of the Vermeulen that they had in their collection. But we really weren't sure how the selector hand here, which was only connected to the snail on the inside and nothing else, was supposed to magically transform its movement into a lateral movement of the barrel. So we went through a number of iterations in terms of the design and ultimately came up with this device. This is a picture also of my colleague Tom working with the Bridgeport and cutting out the pieces before we actually manufactured it and set it up to read the snail and translate that into the lateral motion of the barrel, which worked out quite nicely. So at that point, the real process of kind of a standard rebuilding began. I mean, now we had the pieces, we could put this back together, but there were a lot of problems. I don't know if you can see this, but in the center here, you can see that everything is kind of canted to the right. That's because of the fall, which caused the plates to move relative to each other. So I was really worried about how we were going to be able to straighten this up and get the wheels to mesh again, because clearly they're not meshing on the left side, which is the area where the music train is. Well, the answer is a 32-ton press and very, very gentle pressure application. We clamped the plate with the pillars anchored to it, to the side of it, and actually used the other plate, the companion, to it, and pinned that in place, and then applied pressure until it just overshot, but very, very gradually and very slowly. And we were rewarded. I mean, none of the pillars cracked, none of them came loose. I was very much afraid that we were going to lose the whole project if those started breaking loose on us. But they didn't. The Dutch made those clocks well. So after that, of course, the plates and the wheels were set through the ultrasound, cleaned up, and polished and lacquered. One of the other things that I wanted to mention was we also had to replace the pendulum and suspension block, which was this rather hideous contraption. Let's see if I can find it here. I did bring it. Pass this around. Just a moment. You know what? All I can tell you is that I'll fish it out later. It's as bad as what it looks like, which is it was literally just a brass strip that had a number of right angle bends in it, and another piece that was soldered to the top of it and slapped on the back. Clearly, that was not going to stay on the clock. Working with my machinist colleagues, we actually fabricated one that was much closer to what Vermeulen originally used, and that appears here, and which works quite well. Yes. So the other thing that happened is we got this up and running, and of course was just checking out timekeeping first. And I decided to engage the strike to see what this would sound like, and all of a sudden I came to the conclusion that something seemed like it was very, very wrong. I was hearing the hour being struck twice, once at half past the hour and once at the top of the hour. And it turned out that that was not an error. As a matter of fact, I found out that the Dutch teach timekeeping to their children differently than we do. We say, for example, it's half past the hour, it's 7:30. What the Dutch say is it's 7:30. And so what happens is that they do their arrangement where 8 o'clock would be struck on a high-pitched bell at 7:30, and then at 8 p.m., the large bell on the back of the clock rings the hour again. So you hear the same hour twice, but you hear it on the high-pitched bell a half hour before. So that sort of explained that. And unfortunately, again, having a Dutch colleague, that helped quite a bit. So the next step, of course, as we're moving through this, is we have to get our restorer working on the case, because it's in an awful shape. You know, the veneer is peeling off of it. I have my concerns that with all the additional weight, that this 300-year-old case is going to just crumble. So I made the association of a master restorer by the name of David Norris. And David has worked with Boyd clocks for many years, and he is probably the finest restoration expert in woodwork in the Tampa Bay area. I would highly recommend him for anyone there. He was trained at the Winter Museum and was asked to become the curator when he had completed his training. And he turned it down and went private. You know, his intent was to produce fine work here in the Tampa Bay area, and he just did an absolutely astonishing job on the case. One of the things also was that we did not have the correct fretwork from that era anywhere on this clock. There were only a few tiny pieces of it. So Paul van den Zee, who is in Amsterdam, and I were communicating. He's also a Dutch horologist, and he had been restoring a tall case clock in the Netherlands and had put together a CAD/CAM rendition of the fretwork. And one of the individuals who works with us in our shop is Grant Posner, and he is a master with laser cutting. And we were able to take the laser cutting device, made it with Paul van der Zee's CAD/CAM, and size it for the openings that we had here, and had the woodwork cut to produce the fretwork necessary to restore this to the original type of fretwork that was used by the Dutch in that era. So Grant Posner's machine had actually taken what would have probably taken a day or so of hard work sawing that out, and actually cut these lovely panels in the hood in a period of about 3 minutes each, which is sort of amazing. The veneer on which they're cut is actually veneer that was period correct. So it's from wood that's about 300 years old that David had managed to source and to create the necessary material for the fretwork. So David's work consisted, of course, taking our derelict case, and you can see that it was in pretty rough shape when they started, and doing miraculous things with it. And you can see this is going through just several of the stages, which I'm sure many of you who are involved in woodwork and restoration know these well, of removing the veneer, resecuring, and using period correct glues and resins in order to restore the case, and then reapplying the veneer where appropriate, and also finishing it out with period correct veneer in those areas which needed new veneer to be added. This particular hood, by the way, I should tell you, was very challenging. You'll notice that in the top areas there on the crown, those are now open. It turned out that they were always supposed to be open, but somewhere along the line, somebody veneered those over. And it's, again, probably the same person who put the plastic in the side vents. So that was all removed. And then, of course, we had the appropriate filigree along with the this white silk background for the arrow. This is, again, David Norris applying the final touches. He did a beautiful job on this, did a French rub on it, and brought it up, so as you can see. And the base came out beautifully as well.
Beautiful.
The door. David's just an absolute master of this. He's just does superb work. One of the other things that needed to be done was the hood was lacking a latch for it. It turns out that the Dutch did things a little different, not surprisingly. They actually had a latch that goes through the door and then connects to a pin underneath. And typically what happens is you have a cord on the back of that and you can pull that down and it releases the front door. I employed a fellow by the name of Ryan Adams, who is a blacksmith up in Maine, and Ryan made that from scratch using an image of one provided by Paul Vandenzee over in Amsterdam. And so he gave us the image of one of his clocks, and Ryan was able to duplicate that. One of the other things was the front door of the case was also damaged. One of the two hinges was broken and had been kind of put together as a bodge, and it was really pretty awful, and I really didn't want to put anything like that back in there, so I re-engineered a mating piece for it and matched it up using my mill and created a final product, which you can see there is the one on the right versus the undamaged one on the left. So we were able to get that resurrected as well. So after all was said and done, I went through and played the music for the Steel Clock and Museum and recorded that. Took each of the 14 bells and had them struck and sent that back over to Marieke and her colleagues and said, what do you think? And they said, well, nice try, but you've got a little bit more work to do. So a couple of the bells were not quite what they think they should be, and they have corrected me. And so my next step on this, because this is a kind of an ongoing process, is going to be to tune some of the bells that are slightly out, and I have some substitute bells, fortunately, of the 16 remaining bells that can be put in to replace the ones that are considerably out of tune. Of course, the other thing that I'm looking for during this meet is a 10-pound weight with a brass shell from around about 300 years. So if anybody knows anyone out there who might have such a weight, I'm in the market. Finally, I wanted to treat everybody here to this. Let's see if I can get this to play. Doesn't see that. Is Ken here?
It's playing.
Yeah. Is the audio?
It's playing.
Yeah, it's fine. So right now, it's probably the chord switch.
It's a little faint. But this is one of the minuets, and the clock does play the minuets on the hour now. So That's quite striking. So it's back and playing again for the first time in probably a couple of 100 years, I would say, from the looks of it. So I would like to close and say thank you for entertaining me. Questions? Yes, sir.
Wonderful chat. I'm just wondering, do you know how that clock came to the U.S.?
Actually, I do not. I tried to find out from Todd, and he provided me the name of an individual to contact. I did contact him, and he said, that wasn't my clock, and I don't know how you managed to get my address. But from what I heard from Todd, he said that it had been in the person's family for a long time, that his father, the person's father had it, and that they just wanted to get rid of it. So, it was one of these things. I'll be honest with you. When I saw that at first, I was sort of like a little askance. I mean, it was they had a high starting bid, and I looked and said, this is probably more than I should really bite off, but I need a challenge. And this certainly was one. And I've certainly put an awful lot of time and treasure into it in terms of bringing it back, but I've been trying to do it the right way. The work that we had to do, for the most part, again, just to recap, was, the entire music selector mechanism was missing, as was the key frame, all of the hammers, and the bells. So basically, that was gone. The mechanism itself was completely inactive because the plates were bent, nothing would engage. It was a mess. Yes?
Did you say how many tunes?
I'm sorry?
How many tunes does it play? How many?
Oh, it plays 12 different pieces.
On that one barrel?
All in one barrel, yes. And that's another interesting point. When I got this, and this is one of the things that was giving me ulcers, there are pinpricks in the barrel to tell you where the tracks are. And they're not in the first 12, they're actually in the second 12 of the scribe lines. But in this particular case, there was a 13th prick in the barrel. So I'm looking at this and thinking, 12 songs, 13 positions. Do they have a calibration track in there? Is that what they did? And the other problem was, by the time you counted up all of the scribe lines that would tell you whether it's divisible by 12 or is divisible by 13, it turned out that the total number of scribe lines was actually a multiple of either 12 or 13. So that told you no information either. So it could have still been either one. So, I spent a lot of sleepless nights wondering, what should the key frame look like? Are we basing this on 12 tracks between each hammer, or 13 tracks? And fortunately, Marieke Lefebvre, Morseman, was able to nail it down. She said, no, definitely it's 12. And so went from there. Yes, sir.
How long did the project take?
I started on this in January of 2020. So it was right about this time COVID started. And a lot of it was research, a lot of reading. Then, of course, there were the false starts. We came up with a couple of different designs for the key frame, how to actually make this function the same way. It's not a genuine key frame from that era, nor did I have the engineering specifications for one. This is actually my own design, but it worked, and it works well. So it's really gone on over a period of the last, 2.5, 3 years now, close to that. Yes, sir.
Really enjoyed your talk.
Thank you.
And who advised you that the hammer tails would be, you said brass?
No, the hammer tails are not brass, the hammer heads are brass.
Okay, so the tails are steel.
The tails are steel.
And did you temper those? Were they-
No, I did not. As a matter of fact, the, how I set that up is kind of interesting. I went through a lot of different spring material, looking for the correct amount of tension, because I wanted to go as light as possible, given the age of the brass, to have absolutely minimal force on those pins. I didn't want to shear any of them off. And in my quest to find the right spring, I uncovered an old wooden box in my workshop that I opened up that belonged to my grandfather. And in it were some pocket watches and some other clock tools. And I realized my grandfather had been into this too. And there was a mainspring that was in there that was about, I'd say about a quarter of an inch in width. It was very thin and also very springy, but not too bad. And I said, damn, this is absolutely perfect for this. So my grandfather, who was a bit of a horology nut himself, contributed to the restoration of this clock through this, which is really great. Yes, Jay?
The other question is, do you like the tunes? Because the reason why I asked that is that the Dutch musical clocks that I've been exposed to, they're really kind of, you can't really find the melody.
Right.
As opposed to the English, which, there's, and maybe that's my ear as opposed to a Dutchman's ear. But
It's interesting because there is actually a Dutch database of folk music. And you can go out and listen to many of the different pieces. And several of the pieces that are on this are in that database. My favorite is the Minuet in Andries. And that was the one that actually was played on here. And once I finally get the last three bells in there in the correct order, I have a feeling it will be even more enjoyable. But I love hearing it. And sometimes, because I've got probably about 20 clocks in my house that I keep running, I'll turn off the strike and just listen to the minuet on the hour, which is really very pleasing. Yes, sir.
Bill, top quarter. I'm not coming anywhere close to you because I'm getting knocked out.
No, Todd, actually, no, this is a wonderful challenge. Please go ahead.
I'm sorry I didn't have more information for you when I sold that to you.
But
Where's it gonna be next? Are you keeping it or are you?
well, I've run into one small problem. Fully assembled with the hood on it, it's about 9 feet tall, and I've got an 8-foot ceiling in my house. So my next job is to find a carpenter who can adjust my ceiling up so I can find a little alcove and put it there, because I hope to have it in my home for a long time. Thank you. Yes, Jim?
when fires are incredibly destructive, to anything, but
Right.
was there any analysis, because I assume because the brass was hammered, it had a certain degree of hardness. Was there any concern about the brass having been quite softened because it was exposed to heat?
I didn't see anything that would suggest to me that it had been badly harmed by that. The case was scorched on the outside. I would think if it got hot enough to really do serious damage to the brass, it probably would have incinerated the hood.
Jay, I would imagine, when you anneal, the question is, you mentioned that plates were hammered, so they were tempered
Right.
plates. But in order to anneal non-ferrous metal, probably a common household fire would not get to the point.
Not hot enough to do it? Okay.
I would imagine that would be right.
I would hope you'd be right. See, I started to think a little bit about what probably happened in the history of this clock. And what I believe may have occurred was that there was a fire in the house. The clock fell over during the fire and was damaged, and the chip was taken out of the side of the face. The plates were bent. And after the fire was over, the person probably took it to a clockmaker and said, "Can you make it run again?"
Yeah.
And looking at how badly bent the plates were, it probably said, We could probably get it to run and maybe strike the hour, but that's it. And, you know, the music's not gonna work again because that portion of it was badly mangled. I suspect, like all good clockmakers, the clockmaker said, we'll take the bells off, we'll keep them here, along with these other pieces that we can reuse, and give the clock back to you, and it'll run, but, you know, we're gonna basically remove these other pieces that don't do anything now. And that's probably where they went, and why they probably wound up on some other clock elsewhere, you know, and then they're probably in the home of somebody else. So what was ultimately passed down was a clock that was missing, you know, a good 25–30% of the mechanism. And that's what I got when I bought it from Todd. So then the issue was, you know, how do you put it back together? What should be there? And that's really where the research came in. And a lot of patient digging and a lot of talking with people. And you know, it was a real educational process. I mean, it was a lot of fun. And I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I'd do it again in a heartbeat. David?
Is it okay if I add a couple things?
Yes, please.
I got to watch this process. I'm gonna use my outdoor voice.
Okay.
One of the things he didn't mention was he also restored the dial and did the silvering. So that's all Bill's work also. David Norries, the fellow who did the refinishing, Dr. Kearns did not mention that he's third generation, and our clock shop had worked with the Norries family for about the last 70–75 years. Now, Urbain Norries started the Norries refinishing business, I think it was 1919, and his son, let's see, it was I think it was Charles Norries was his son, and then David Norries was the grandson. David Norries and I got into our family's businesses about the same time. And I remember seeing some of David's early work thinking, he's got a ways to go. And then of course I see some of my early works and I'm thinking, yeah, okay, that's pretty amateur. But that being said, along comes a Daniel Quare, a year duration clock that we had the great fortune of having coming into our shop for restoration, which we've worked on several years, and also for it to be consigned. The Daniel Quare case was also in rough shape, and upon seeing it and knowing the stature of the clock, I knew there was only one person in Florida that I would want to handle the job, and that was David Norries. David had retired, so he didn't have his shop open to the public anymore, so I took the clock to his house without him knowing I was taking it. His son was there, and I thought, perfect, he's not even here to say no. I'm going to drop this off and insist that he do the restoration, which he did. Unbeknownst to me at the time, his son was actually a little interested in getting into the refinish business, so I encouraged him. I said, you have no idea what you have in your hand here. If you so desire to get into the refinishing business, you will never have to advertise. You're going to learn things that you can't learn anywhere else. And please have your dad restore this Daniel Quare case for me. So David Norries got involved with the Daniel Quare and of course came into the shop to learn more about the man himself and what he was dealing with and what kind of a museum piece it was. And that's where he got to be friends with Dr. Kearns at the same time. And David did a beautiful job on this Daniel Quare, which we are finishing or have finished as we speak. Dr. Kearns also did all the refinishing and rebuilding of the Daniel Quare, and it's of this level of restoration now, and it is running very nicely. We've done the math recently, and I can't remember how many times a clock strikes on one wind if it runs a year, but the ticks and the strikes are astronomical numbers. So I just wanted to add that. You said weights. Did the weights you found in the shop not?
No, they were fine for the music train and for the strike, but I'm just looking.
Oh, you're looking for one more?
Right. Just the going train. It's an 8-day movement. It needs to be about 10 pounds.
Okay. Dr. Kearns had looked around, what was it, to get the two weights that you did find.
Right. And I contacted a couple of suppliers in the Netherlands and elsewhere, and I had worked out that the minimum necessary to drive it was about 20 pounds on each of the weights. And they had come back and said, well, the closest we can get you is probably about 17 pounds. And good luck. And so I was a little bit down in the dumps and had been walking around the shop and came up to where our horses were in the front, and I noticed that there were these two really ratty looking lead weights that the lead on the top had all started to oxidize. So you've got nice white powder on top of these, and I'm looking and thinking, now that's something you don't want to have around children, but let's take an estimate of these things, and damned if they both were 20 pounds. So, you know, they were just perfect for it and need to be shined up, but at this point I just need to find a third weight, which really shouldn't be that hard to do.
So we had some test weights in our shop that were of a correct period, is it, or close?
Yes, I would say from the looks of those that they would have been at least a couple of 100 years old.
They're at least a couple 100 years old, and we had them sitting next to our horses as test weights. You know, when we go and pick up grandfather clocks or tall case clocks at customers' houses, we just take the mechanics. We don't take the dial. Very often we won't even take the hands. We will take the pendulum for timekeeping, but we don't even take the weights because we have all that kind of stuff in the shop for testing, bench testing stuff. But anyway, I want to say that it's, you know, Boyd Clocks has been in Tampa 79 years now in business. We were there because of a pandemic. My father got polio in 1949, but was very mechanical and figured, well, clocks was something he could do at a bench. And I got into it as a youngster because Dad was in a wheelchair. Anyway, we've been in the business a long time, and I just want to tell you it's an honor to have Dr. Kearns working in the shop to bring his level of professionalism and care and love for the art of restoration. Thank you for letting me. Oh, Dr. Kearns and I are going to do a program on the Antikythera mechanism tomorrow, I think at 2.
Yes.
And anyway, I was told to plug that. So 2 o'clock tomorrow, we'll be giving a talk on Antikythera.
You patented, looks like your door is oxidized. Did you patent it, and how did you do it?
I'm sorry?
Did you patent your new parts? They look like they're dark and,
I'm sorry.
the new parts that you made, are they patented? Did you patent them, and how did you do it?
Oh, you mean patented?
Patented them. Put an
Created a
oxidation.
patina on
Oh,
oxidation.
no, it's just whatever they acquired naturally since I put those together.
You have to look at age.
Yeah. No, that wasn't
We'll do
intended
tomorrow
to,
today.
Okay, sure.
Program.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate it. Yeah, it's
Anyway, that's just the way.
everything that I do is on my dad.